Welcome to Westchester University's Emily K. Asplund Concert Hall. My name is Bradley Flynn. I'm the director here of the Office of Sustainability at the university. The sustainability community at Westchester University is a large and diverse and dedicated group, and we are so grateful to see so many students, faculty, staff who have showed up, as well as so many of our neighbors from the borough, the townships, the county, the region. Thank you for coming out for this lecture this evening. This evening's event is a really good example of the large and supportive, the long and supportive collaboration that the university has had with the sustainability community in Chester County as a whole. We share commitments to environmental, social, and economic sustainability, and we have had many years of collaborating on events like this one. That collaboration is especially productive with the member organizations of the Westchester Green Team. And to tell you about the mission and the initiatives of the Green Team, I have the pleasure of introducing Courtney Finneran, a member of the Westchester Green Team Board of Directors and the chair of the Green Team's Living Landscapes community. Courtney?
Thank you all, and I know we are here to see some native gardening royalty with Professor Tallamy, so I appreciate you giving me about 10 minutes to talk about the Green Team and some of the amazing work we've been doing. And so we really are an all-volunteer group. We were formed in 2019, and we work primarily within the borough, but we don't stop at borough limits. We do go to our neighboring municipalities. Our mission is we work to establish and nourish green initiatives in the local community in harmony with nature and each other, promoting the health of all living things in planet Earth. And that is our mission statement. We are a group organized by committees. So we have, you name it, we have a committee for it. And the reason that this is so successful for our group is because it allows for volunteers to really find their role within any community, or with any committee, and then we can have different projects that are built at and developed at the committee level. And so we have a really, really fascinating and very, very detailed website. We are always looking for additional volunteers, so feel free to go to our website and check us out. Tonight I'm going to talk about 6 specific projects that the Living Landscapes Committee has undertaken, and we're just going to jump right in here. So the first project was an invasive removal project we did on the Goose Creek, and this was in partnership with the Tree Commission, with the Westchester Borough Tree Commission, where we had 20 volunteers work to remove years and years of invasives. We're talking honeysuckle, grapevine, knotweed, which is still coming back. I mean, you name it, it was there. And so we spread 10 inches of wood chips that were donated by Borough Public Works to really try to keep down the weed pressure so that we could have some time before we planted. The arborist, our borough arborist, has been a great partner with our group, and he planted several tree species. And we're slowly adding in some donated native perennials, and we like to call this a guerrilla planting because we have this being done on a volunteer basis by a member of our group who is simply going and just planting for us. And so really, you know, we're truly lucky to have some volunteers that are that committed. And so here we have some pictures of really some of the awfulness we were dealing with, and then just prior to planting with all of the wood chips. And this is a riparian buffer, so example. And then what I love is it's right on the street, and so we have some children that'll walk by, including my own, and we'll say, okay, let's count the caterpillars, right? So here we've got 4, and this was like 2 days ago. Okay, so really exciting to see. And then here's a picture of the project right now. And I do have a lot of rabbits that like to eat my plants, so we cage up the tasty ones. Next, building off of the success of this project, we came up with an idea, it's
We are so fortunate to have the good work of the Green Team and all of the Green Team's volunteers as inspiration and motivation for all of us who live and work in Chester County. Now it is my honor to introduce our distinguished guest who will give this evening's lecture entitled Nature's Best Hope, which also happens to be the title of the author's latest book. Professor Doug Tallamy is a Chester County neighbor of ours. He's been a professor of entomology and wildlife ecology at the University of Delaware since 1982. He's a scientist, an author, a teacher, a mentor to undergraduate and graduate students, an activist, and an inspiration to countless readers, gardeners, ecologists, and researchers. Much more can be said about his many accomplishments and contributions to science and the defense of nature, but rather than have me tell you about all those things, better we hear directly from him. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Doug Tallamy.
Thank you, Brad. It's actually 1981. Keep me a whole year ago. While we're waiting for something to appear up there, when Brad was kicking off the evening, he talked about the sustainability community. And it occurred to me, that's our problem. We have a few people that belong to the sustainability community and everybody else doesn't. So what I want to talk about tonight is how we won't have sustainability communities anymore because it's going to be so much part of our culture that everybody will be a member of the sustainability community. What should we talk about tonight? We gotta go back. There we go. All right, we're gonna talk about nature's best hope. But before we do that, I want to mention Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson from Harvard. He's Harvard emeritus at this point. He's 92. Everybody knows E.O. Wilson. Certainly the most famous entomologist, probably of all times. One of the most famous biologists. He writes a book every year, and the book he wrote in 2016 was this one, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And his message was very clear. If we're going to save life on planet Earth, and that includes us, we have to save half of the Earth for nature. Well, that's a good idea, but most of the country, most of the world, even though we all highly respect EO, said, how are we going to do that? Is this possible? You know, half of terrestrial Earth is in some form of agriculture already, and 7.8 billion of us in all of our infrastructure, and airports and shopping centers and roads and so on, are in the other half. And we don't have a third half to save. So how are we going to do this? Well, I actually think we can do it, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. We can realize EO's dream, but we need a new approach to conservation. The old approach isn't going to work. So before we get there, let's talk about what happened in 2019. We had what we call an oak fest, where members of the Red Oak group got together and all decided to make their acorns at the same time. This is what it looked like in a lot of places. I am easily entertained. So I took one of those acorns and I stared at it. And I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First it chewed a little hole for its head right there. And it forced its head through there, then it forced its entire body through that hole. It was a tight squeeze. Looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally it plopped down. And that's a very dangerous time for that insect larva because it's good to eat. There are a lot of things after it. So it wiggles and squirms below the soil surface in about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. Within that chamber, it converts itself to a pupa. And then it stays there for 2 whole years. After 2 years, it comes out as an acorn pupa. what a weevil looks like. People think they have big noses. That's actually an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are way down there at the end of that extension. And they take those mouth parts and they chew a hole down into the center of the acorn, turn around and lay an egg in that hole, and that's how the larva gets down there. You might wonder why they spent 2 years underground and let them come out the next year like most insects. It takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if they came out the very next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Of course, after the weevil leaves the acorn, it leaves a hole, a true vacuum. You know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she has filled it with 3 species of Temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the vacated holes made by acorn weevils. And if a scout group finds a new acorn, they get very excited because their old one is falling apart. So they tell everybody it's time to move. They grab the larvae, they grab the eggs, they move the entire colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes. Then they post a guard at the entrance of that hole to make sure nobody else comes in, and that's where they'll live for the next 2 years. What is my point with this story? That's just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions, largely between animals and plants that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and oaks. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They grab one from a tree, fly up to a mile from the tree, tap it below the surface of the soil, and the object is they're going to go get in wintertime and have something to eat. But they only remember where 1 out of every 4 acorns that they bury are. So in essence, every 4 acres, they're planting 3 oak trees. And a single jay can bury 4,500 acorns in a season. So that's a lot of oak trees being spread around by jays. Another specialized relationship between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So if you don't have carpenter ants, you won't have pileated woodpeckers. You won't have carpenter ants unless you have lots of big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee unless you have that plant, Facilium, as the pollen that bee can rear its young on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our bees. We have about 4,000 species of native bees, and a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. You won't have the Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtlehead. I could spend the rest of the week talking about specialized interactions. My point is, though, that these interactions, nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, admired its beauty, and he said, "Leave it as it is." And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Of course, we can't do that anymore because we didn't leave it as it was. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. I gotta take a drink, sorry. Excuse me. Teddy's choking me up here. So we can't leave the country as it was, and that's because we have logged it repeatedly, we have tilled it, we have drained it, we've grazed it. We have 770 million acres of rangeland. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done this? I don't know. I imagine we thought the Earth, our nest, was so big we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that, and that's why we're seeing pretty scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Follow up with this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, EO told us what it would mean if we were to lose our insects, and he did it way back in 1987 in this paper called The Little Things That Run the World. And his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, lots of nasty things would happen. Most of our flowering plants would go extinct. And if most of our flowering plants went extinct, that would disrupt energy flow through our ecosystem so drastically that the food webs that support our animals, our reptiles, our amphibians, our birds, our mammals, those food webs would collapse and all those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is fungi and bacteria. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do that. Remember, humans, us, we are products of nature. Created by nature, we're totally dependent on what we call ecosystem services, our life support systems, produced by nature. This is just a list of some of the things that plants do, not just for us, but for everything else on the planet. They're producing that oxygen that we need, they're cleaning the water that falls from the sky, slowing its journey to the sea where it's too salty to use. Carbon capture, enormously important today. They're pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, locking it up in their tissues, and then the extra carbon that they harness, they're pumping into the ground through their roots. And that's why our soils are brown or black. Our soils hold enormous amounts of carbon. Plants are building topsoil, holding it in place, they're preventing floods, they're dampening severe weather, converting sunlight to food. You know, without plants, we'd have to eat sunlight. Good luck. What do animals do for plants? They provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So developing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea. But today it's an absolutely terrible idea. Because with our enormous human populations, we need more ecosystem services today than ever before. So today's a downright terrible idea. There have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans need to work on our relationship with planet Earth. And Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is that the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, there have been indigenous groups that have been able to do that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We have this idea that we could grow forever, that we can extract from the earth forever, and there won't be any consequences. So we typically take more than the earth has to offer from a particular place, totally destroying it, then moving it to another place, doing the same thing. Not sustainable behavior. So Allah had an idea that, he believed in humans. He really thought we didn't need to be that stupid all the time, and that we could learn to use the earth a little bit more gently. He knew we had to use the earth. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine. But he believed we could do it gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. And that's what he called the land ethic. And he wrote about it in the San County Almanac. What he didn't write about, though, was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect that the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time, that notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still embedded in our own culture, that he may not have recognized it as an option. Well, what I want to argue tonight, with you, is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We need to flip that on its head. We need to practice conservation, actually restore nature where we dismantled it, where there are a lot of people, because that is almost everywhere. In other words, we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. It's the only way it's going to work. And I mean thrive. I don't mean hang on by a thread. Where are we going to start? Let's go back to private property. Most of the land is privately owned. East of the Mississippi, 85.6% of the land privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, because we'll be working in areas that are too too small, too few, too isolated. Now when I use the word conservation, I'm not using it correctly. We do want to conserve whatever is out there that hasn't been destroyed. We certainly want to keep doing that. But in a lot of places, there's not a lot of those places that haven't been destroyed. Your Gordon Woods here, it's a good example. But what we want to do is actually rebuild nature where we already have destroyed, where we dismantled it. We want to reassemble enough of those specialized interactions so that you have functional ecosystems once again. It won't look like it did 400 or 500 years ago, but it still can be a functional ecosystem. But not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally, so we have to start with the most important ones, the most important groups, and there's two groups that we can't do without. One of them is those flowering plants that are capturing the energy from the sun through photosynthesis, turning it into food. So now, and we need the pollinators that allow those plants to reproduce. So now we have the food stored in plant parts, mostly leaves. We have to get it to animals, or we won't have any animals. Most animals don't eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat invertebrates that ate those plants. And it turns out that not only are insects the most common invertebrates eating plants, but caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of insects, any other type of plant eater. If we design ecosystems that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we'll have failed food webs. Let's use the Carolina chickadee as an example. That's the chickadee we have right here. There's a lot of data on Carolina chickadees. They're the birds that are feeders all winter long. So if we put out seed right now, they'll start eating seed in our feeders. 50% of their diet in the wintertime is seed. The other 50% is insects, even in the wintertime. But when they're reproducing, their babies cannot eat seeds. So they switch entirely to insects. And if they are in a healthy environment, they will feed their young exclusively on caterpillars. And it turns out that chickadees are not exceptions. 96% of our terrestrial birds breed their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? Well, this is a citizen science project that one of my students, Ashley Kennedy, did a few years ago. She put out a call to bird photographers around the country and asked them to take pictures of birds during the breeding season when they're carrying food to the nest. And they were going to send those pictures to Ashley. She's going to identify what the prey items were in the beaks of the birds and reconstruct the nestling diet for as many species of birds in North America as she could. And what you're looking at is a summary of her data. There's the 20 most common bird families in North America. And the green bars are the percentage of those nestling diets that were caterpillars. And in 16 out of the 20 bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, if we create landscapes that don't have enough caterpillars, most of our birds will not be able to successfully reproduce. So what's special about caterpillars is actually several things special. One of them is they're soft. So think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is his exoskeleton. It's cute. It's not digestible, and birds don't want a lot of that. And because caterpillars are soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injury. If you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. The beak's like a plunger. You just stuff it down. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. So a lot of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They are nutritious. They're high in fat, high in protein, low percentage of chitin, of exoskeleton, compared to most other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible. A lot of beetles have sharp edges. And it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mention carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate. And birds are vertebrates, and we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants, and we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. And that's why my wife Cindy makes sure I have lots of carrots to get my beta-carotene, and lots of tomatoes to get my lycopene, lots of whatever that is to get my lutein. And when I eat all of those things, they stimulate my immune system. I can't think of a better time to have a healthy immune system. They are antioxidants. They run around our body, protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality, improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this male prothonotory warbler, who is carotenoids from what he eats, but carotenoid content of various bird prey items is not equal. These first two bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of invertebrate prey. Here are the adult caterpillars down here, the moths and butterflies themselves. Far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating green leaves anymore. It's the caterpillars eating the green leaves where the carotenoids are. And here's the earthworm way down here on the right. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So this and other studies that we don't have time to talk about are suggesting very strongly that caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. They are essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say birds eat caterpillars. The next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Is one or two enough? One or two a day enough? Let's go back to chickadees. Again, a lot of data on chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a clutch of chickadees? One or two is not enough. It takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks in the nest, just to get them to the point where they leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed the caterpillars for another 21 days. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to make a nest of a bird that's a third of an ounce. 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and I would think you do because in so many places that's all that's out there, is our yards, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard. And if you don't have all those, that's because chickadees are foraging about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodline. And if you landscape in a way that does not create all those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the very important factors causing bird declines that are out there. We went to the original data set from Rosenberg et al. That's a group that said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And we divided our terrestrial bird species up into 2 groups. The species that require insects, typically when they're breeding, and the species that don't. So there are birds like finches and doves that can rear their young on seed. Not many species, but they don't require insects. And look, over the last 50 years, they didn't lose any numbers at all. But the species that require insects lost on average 10 million individuals per species. This doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly does suggest that if you take bird food away, it's not going to help the birds. It's really not rocket science, folks. We need to start thinking about new goals for our landscapes. In the past century, more than a century, we have landscapes strictly with aesthetics in mind. We've chosen our plants for what they look like. We now need to choose our plants for what they look like, but also for what they do. And one of the things they have to do is support insect populations, primarily caterpillars. So how do we add caterpillars to our landscapes? Well, we do that by adding the plants that make caterpillars. Pretty simple. There is a catch, though, and that is that most plants don't make a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about it. We have to choose the plants that do, and we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are fussy. And the monarch illustrates it perfectly. You can have all the crepe myrtles, and all the zelkova, and all the boxwood, and all of the ginkgos, all of the Asian ornamentals that we typically landscape with, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing you're going to eat is one of the milkweeds. That's called host plant specialization. And it turns out most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Why? Because plants have made them that way. And plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals. Secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? This is where the specialization comes in. Every plant lineage that's out there has a unique cocktail of chemical defenses in its tissues. And an insect species can't adapt to all of them, so it picks 1 or 2 plant lineages that are really similar in the way they defend themselves, and it gets good at getting around those. It develops the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, the behavioral adaptations, and the life history I'd never even seen a Canadian mallet. That's what one looks like. I've seen them now. That's what the adult looks like, just like a leaf. Well, to have Canadian mallet, you have to have meadow root. We didn't have any meadow root. Meadow root used to grow here hundreds of years ago, but it was farmed to death. All the meadow root was gone. So I got some meadow root seeds from someplace, planted them, grew very nicely. But this was early on, and I actually had very little faith that the Canadian mallet would be able to find my little patch of meadow root. So I didn't even go out and check the meadow root. So one time I was walking about a month or 2 months after I planted it, I was walking by it, and it was covered with Canadian mallets. So this is working right away. I'm still impressed that that happens. Now I've got a good population of meadow root and Canadian mallets. I should caught one the other night on our property. So we've added 2 species to the property. Same thing with the goldenrod stowaway, that beautiful yellow-orange moth. Actually, it's a misnomer. It has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on that plant, Bites aristosa, which is a ditch daisy. I did know where there were some bitings in a power line cut about 14 miles away in Bear, Delaware. So I went and got some seeds, planted them at home. They grew very nicely. It took a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find my bitings. What they finally did, now I've got a good population of both of those. So now we've added 4 species to the property. I wanted to see if we could get the hackberry emperor. Not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs here. It's a species that ought to be here. But as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry. We didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. 4 years. It took 4 years for the hackberry emperor to find my hackberry, but it finally did. Checked one of the hackberry branches in June. There were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So now we've added 6 species to the property, and that's how it went. I did not plant goldenrod. I came in on its own, but along with it came a lot of things that depend on goldenrod, like the brown-hooded owlet, the arsenical flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaganothus, the goldenrod gall moth. This is one that has not come, the goldenrod flower moth. I don't know why it hasn't found my goldenrod. I've got a good book. That's what the caterpillars look like. But this is part of the fun. This is anticipation. It's like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out and I check for the goldenrod flower moth caterpillars. Right about now. One of these years you're going to find it, and that'll be a great day. Planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. I hear people don't like Virginia creeper. I don't know why, though. It's a great native plant. It can climb our trees without girdling them, without pulling them down. It's got good fall color, makes very nutritious berries for the birds in the fall. It's an excellent pollinator plant. Its flowers are tiny and inconspicuous, and we think, well, because they're small and they're not pretty, that it's not any good. It's great. All the bees love it. And it's the best source of host plant for the very large sphinx moths that are the primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx, and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. I want to see if I can get the double-toothed prominent, just because it's such a cool-looking caterpillar. I mean, even if you don't like caterpillars, you gotta like that guy. Well, it's a specialist on elm. Of course, we didn't have any elms. We lost our elms to the Dutch elm disease. The University of Delaware still has 2 or 3 big elms that did not die, and every year they make lots of seeds. So right after we moved in, I gathered up some seeds, planted them at home, grew very nicely. They're now 19 years old, and those trees are at least 80 feet tall. So, and they attracted the double-toothed prominent right away. We're talking about American elm. One of the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. We didn't have any evening primrose. I planted evening primrose, and the moth comes. It spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. It's very cute. And I planted lots of oak trees. I want to focus on oaks for a while. These are just examples of what we put in. But oaks are such important plants. This is the Bedford Oak in Bedford, New York. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And some people say, actually a lot of people say, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if it has to be 400 years old before you can enjoy it, you're right. You will. But if you can enjoy what oaks do in your yard, what they contribute to your ecosystem, you can enjoy them right away. And I can say this with confidence because I planted most of our oaks as acorns, which meant they were free. We're very thrifty at home. Or 2-foot bare-bone whips, which means they cost $1.50 each. And immediately they started to rebuild the food web that drives nature at our house by things like the solitary oak leaf miner, juvenile's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the Suzuki's probolactus, red-washed caterpillar, yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak pumpkin, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the smoky patched orange patch smoky wing, the oblique heteracantha, that's the oblique heteracantha. That's the white blotched heteracantha, red line caterpillar, the leopard, and literally hundreds more species of caterpillars have come to the oaks on our property, and they come right away. This is a pinup that has popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of it. So you don't have to wait hundreds of years for your oaks to start to contribute. Did it kill that plant? No. They can take the surface. That's what they do. This is what our house looks like today. We're very traditional. We've got some lawn there. But I put a lot of plants back. Not all the plants. Who knows how many plants were there originally, but I put a good number of them back. And 4 years ago, I made it a goal to try to take a picture of every species of moth that now makes a living on our property. I'm still at it, but as of yesterday, I've got 1,135 species of moths that I have taken pictures of at our property. And remember, we've got 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the land mass, we have 44% of all the moths that occur in the entire state. And we have them because we put the plants back. And because so many of those are types of bird food, we have recorded 60 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Bred, not flew by. Why am I telling you this? Well, here's another headline that we saw last year. World Wildlife Fund says we've lost 2/3 of the wildlife since 1970. I'm thinking, not at our house. I'm sure we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3, and it didn't take that long. We did it by just putting the plants back. We can reverse these terrible headlines. That's the message. We can reverse them. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres, and everybody doesn't have 10 acres. Can it work on smaller plots? How about suburban plots? Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cynthia and I have. And they're surrounded in the suburbs. They're surrounded by everybody with the big lawns. The first thing they did was get rid of their major invasive plant, which is Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. And then they planted lots of native species. They put in a water feature they call a bubbler, and then they sat back and started to count the birds that would use their yard. They're up to 149 bird species that have used their yard, including 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So on 0.6 acres, they're doing pretty well. What about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, because right on the outside of that wall there is one of O'Hare Airport's runways. Right over here is Kennedy Expressway. Pam has 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. And she's an island. She's not connected to any natural area at all. It's a pretty 1/10 of an acre. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive plants. She put in 60 species of native plants, a water feature for the birds, and then she started to count her birds. She's up to 120 species. 121, she emailed me last night. 121 species get the yellow-throated vireo the other day, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Chicago to Pam's house. Check it out. All right, there's 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way. And we do want to succeed in a big way. And one of them is we've got to shrink the area we have in England. We've got, as of 2005, we had 40 million acres in England, which is an ecological dead state. That's an area the size of New England, dedicated to a status symbol that is not sustaining life around us. And, you know, we humans need our status symbols. So we're not going to suggest that we get rid of lawn, but I am suggesting we cut the area of lawn in half and replant half that area. If there's 40 million acres in lawn, and we replant half of it, that will give us 20 million acres that we can use to create a new national park. If we do this at home, we can call it Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympics National Park. No parental supervision. Let them work it out by themselves. This is critically important because our kids are the future stewards of the planet. They're not going to be good stewards unless they love what they're stewarding, unless they understand what it is, unless they understand why they need to steward it, and know how to steward it. And maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter. This is Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest patch of nature. It's a little patch of lawn with a hedge. But she discovered there are unknown lizards there. So she sent me this picture to tell me how to hunt lizards. You get on the ground, you cover yourself with leaves and sticks so that the lizards can't see you coming. Then you crawl very slowly towards the lizard. No smiling. This is serious business. You can wear your best dress, that's okay. But you crawl slowly towards the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, you learn how to take care of it, you become a good steward of that piece of nature. You've learned that vital relationship with nature, and you've done it all on your own. Now, I don't think Zoe's going to be crawling on the ground in her best dress catching lizards the rest of her life, although she sent me this picture just the other day. So, maybe she will. But I guarantee she will remember catching lizards in Hawaii the rest of her life. And I also guarantee she's going to be a good steward of the planet. If you want your kids to do more than catch lizards, get Nancy Stradisti's Nature Play at Home. Gives you dozens of examples of how to expose your kids to the natural world right where they live. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, help create that 20 million acres we're talking about, go to my new website here, homegrownnationalpark.org, and get yourself on the map. What does that mean? It means record your location and the amount of area that you're going to plant in acres. And then your little piece of the world will light up, and you will see who else around you who is doing this. We're going to be able to see the 20 million acres take shape. This is supposed to be motivational. I mean, people, the social media people tell me this is going to work. Where people will want to do this just because everybody else is doing it. And that's what we need. I literally, over the last 15 years, have reached tens of thousands of people. But for this to work, we have to reach tens of millions of people, actually, probably hundreds of millions. It's got to change the culture. So you've got to get out beyond the choir. This is supposed to do that. It doesn't cost anything, by the way. And somebody says, are you using our data? I don't even know what that means. No, not using anybody's data. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants we're going to put in the area that was once lawn? Some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone lines. Remember what a keystone is? It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch. If you take the keystone out of the arch collapses. Well, keystone plants are performing that same role. They are so important in our food webs that if we take them out of the food web collapses because they are making most of the food. Just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of that caterpillar food that drives those food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house you're building as if they're the 2x4s. They're essential. They're holding it up. You can't build an ecological house out of wallpaper. But you're not finished building your house when you use the keystone plants. They're just something that you need to have in there. So the question is no longer simply are natives better than non-natives. On average, they certainly are. But there are a whole lot of natives that aren't contributing all that much. So we want to use the ones, or include the ones that are contributing the most, both for our pollinators and our caterpillars. I get an email once in a while from somebody saying, don't you know that ginkgo biloba from Asia actually grew in North America, 7 million years ago? That makes them native, that means we can plant them and everything will be great. Yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today. But I'm not going to have that argument because that's not the metric anymore. It's not whether it's native or not, it's whether it's doing anything or not, whether it's contributing. I don't care if ginkgos grew on the moon 7 million years ago. They produced 0 species of caterpillars. They are not contributing to the local food web, and they are taking up space. What's contributing more than any other type of plant? It's our oaks. In 84% of the counties in which oaks occur, they are the #1 This is an example of what Keystone Oaks are doing in my yard. Remember, I've taken pictures of 1,135 moth species. I'll get to the butterflies. I haven't gotten there. Out of the 1,135 species, 985 have known host plants. So there's a bunch we don't know what they're doing. Out of the 985 species, 287 used oaks. And we've got 69 genera of native woody plants on our property. And only one of them is quercus, the oaks. We've got hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity, but they're supporting 29% of the moth species diversity. Who knows what percentage of the birds that are breeding in our yard depend on the food produced by oaks. That's the role of a keystone plant. If you want to know what the keystone plants are where you live, anywhere in the country, go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the rank list of both woody and herbaceous plants will pop up. For your county, and notice I say native oaks, native cherries, native willows. If I go to the nursery and say, I want to buy a cherry, they'll sell me an ornamental cherry from Asia. If I want to buy a willow, they'll sell me a weeping willow from Turkey. You got to specify. You want a native member of these really important genera. Because if you get a non-native member, it's going to reduce caterpillar use by 65%. We've done that experiment. These are the most important herbaceous genera. Goldenrod's very high. The various aster genera are very high. Our perennial sunflowers are very high. Not only in terms of supporting caterpillars, goldenrods support 110 species of caterpillars, but also in terms of supporting our specialist bees. When you want to make a pollinator garden, you have to plant for the specialists. The generalists will use those plants as well, but you've got to meet the needs of the specialists. If you only plant for the generalists, if you only have a honeybee in mind, most of our native bees won't be able to use those plants. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn, we're going to put in keystone plants, we're going to attract a lot of insects to our yard, then we're going to kill them with a security light. And of course, that's not the goal. There's a lot of research coming out now which is convincingly demonstrating that light pollution at night is one of the major causes of insect decline. These are all the ways that lights kill insects at night. But this is good news, folks. We have to turn around insect decline. We cannot tolerate it anymore. We can't let it get any worse. We've got to turn it around. If we can do that by flicking a switch, we're getting off easy. That's pretty easy to do. But I know what you're going to say. I can't turn that light off over my garage at night because the bad man. All right, put a motion sensor on, so it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to recognize is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your security light, put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best. Yellow wavelengths are the least attractive to nocturnal insects. If we switched out our white lights, put yellow lights in there, overnight we would save billions of insects and probably billions of dollars too, because the LEDs are a lot more energy efficient. So we're going to shrink the lawn, we're going to put in keystone plants, we're going to turn out our lights, and then we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come and kill more insects. It's the booming business around the country. It really started booming when the Zika virus didn't come to our country. Yeah, in New York City they started fogging for Zika, even though it wasn't in Florida. Mosquito Joe will say this is okay because it's a natural product, and he's right. It's a fog made from pyrethroids, which are found in chrysanthemums, very natural. But cyanide is a natural product too, so that's not a convincing argument. He'll also say it only kills mosquitoes, and I wish it did, but that's not even close to true. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with. Last year, right at this time, there was a big splash in the news about the big monarch kills that Mosquito Joe was responsible for. You fog monarchs, and down they go. Hundreds of them on the ground. But the big thing is it doesn't work. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you control them in the larval stage. To control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of the adult mosquitoes. Mosquito Joe kills between 10 and 50% on a good day, which means he's never controlling them, he's got to come back, he's also very expensive. If you really want to control mosquitoes, do it this way. Get a bucket. People say, how big a bucket? I don't care. Get a bucket, put water in it, put a handful of straw or hay in the bucket. Let it ferment for a couple days. It's building up populations of algae and diatoms, and that's what mosquito larvae eat. The adult mosquitoes, females in your yard, that's a magnet to them. They will lay their eggs in your mosquito bucket. Then you go to the hardware store and you buy mosquito ducks. It costs about $9. likes it or a bird drinks, it's not going to hurt it. You might put a screen on top of it so your local chipmunks don't jump in and drown. But if everybody did this, we could control our mosquitoes cheaply and in a very targeted way without killing everything else. All right, the fourth thing that we have to do in order to turn this food web issue around is to landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete the development. So here in Chester County, oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. This is just an example. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the tree, the leaves, then they spin a cocoon and hang from the branch, then they emerge as an adult, and they do it all again. I wish everything did that, but most species don't. 94% of them finish growing as caterpillars on the tree, and then they drop from the tree. They wiggle away beneath the ground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter under the tree. And that's the problem. That's the problem, because there is no leaf litter under the tree. And you know this is the way we landscape everywhere. We're very, very neat, and that makes us very, very neat, but it makes this an ecological trap for our caterpillars. If an adult moth lays up here, the caterpillar grows, going to fall down here. We mow and compact the soil under our trees so that it's so hard they can't get underground, and there's no leaf litter. And of course, the cement landscape is even less of a viable option. By the way, I'm not trying to discourage trees in cities. I'm trying to discourage the profligate use of cement as a default landscape. We know this wrecks our watersheds. And cement, by the way, is a major greenhouse gas producer. This is what most people do. You got a tree, they put it in a yard, and we're just starting to measure what caterpillar survivorship is in a situation like that. But I guarantee it's much higher in a situation like this. Where you've got a tree and then a layered landscape. Maybe a dogwood over here, native azalea, ferns, ground cover. It's a safe site. The caterpillar drops down, the soil's not compacted, nobody's going to mow them, nobody's going to walk on them. A lot of leaf litter under there, they can complete their development. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening, or any of your gardening. Put beds around your trees. That's how you shrink your lawn. A bed around every single tree. So the slide we saw earlier about the big bed around the redbud, perfect. That's perfect for the caterpillars on redbud. They're all safe sites. This is where you use your native ground covers, like wild ginger, or mayapple, or foamflower, or ferns. This is a hotel in Athens, Georgia. Those are red maples. Any caterpillar developing on those red maples can fall down into a safe site, even though it's the middle of the city. So we can do a lot better at how we landscape underneath our trees. And I guarantee that is another major cause of insect declines that we can pretty easily turn around. Another grad student, Desiree Narango, did some great work in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., again on Chickadees. And her results suggest there is some room for compromise in plant choice. What she did was look at how landscapes that are dominated by native plants support chickadee populations over the years compared to landscapes dominated by introduced plants, the typical landscapes. And the first thing she found is that when they're dominated by introduced plants, 75% fewer caterpillars. So we reduced the insect load or the bird food by 75%. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. There were nest boxes up in each landscape, and the chickadees came and they looked around, but they were smart enough. So there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try to breed. If they did try to breed, those nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. They were 29% less likely to survive at all. If they did survive, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to fledge. If you put all that into a population growth model, as a function of the percentage of non-native woody plant biomass in your yard. We look at woody plants because that's where chickadees forage. This is what you get. That dotted line is replacement rate. That's the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you reproduce at that level, that's a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking. If you make more babies than adults die, you've got a growing population. But if you're below this line, you make fewer babies, that's a shrinking, unsustainable population. And right here is where those lines overlap, generously speaking, which suggests we could have up to 30% of the woody plants in our landscape non-native. They can't be invasive. Invasive plants are ecological tumors. They never stop. But the ginkgo is not invasive. The crepe bird is not invasive. Your boxwood's not invasive. natives in informal designs? Of course. This is a line designed by Lynn O'Shaughnessy. She sent it to me this spring. This was taken from a drone 400 feet up. That's a big garden. Every plant in that garden, and you don't get more formal than that, is a native plant. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe every day. I guess that's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. It formalizes it. Tells people this is intentional. It's pretty. It's helping a number of species of bees. It's not very big. Could be bigger. Let's review quickly why we need pollinators. You hear all the time it's because they pollinate a third of our crops. I don't like that argument because first of all it's wrong. It's really got a seventh of our crops. And with the typical diet that we eat, it's really got a 12th of our crops. But people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so why do we need pollinators? You need pollinators because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. Forget our crops. If we lost our pollinators, we lose 80 and 90% of the plants that are pollinated. Not an option. Where do we need pollinators? Everywhere we need plants. Which is everywhere. How about this garden? This is a Drew Latham design, much bigger than the other one. Imagine the amount of life that is here compared to the amount of life that is here. Seems like a no-brainer. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Yes, they can, and a number of them are doing it. Minnesota has a cost-sharing program. It's called lawn-to-laking that encourages homeowners to reduce some or all of their lawn, replace it with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. Very popular. Pennsylvania has started a lawn conversion program. I didn't know about this. It's only 2 years old. You can get up to $5,000 per acre to convert your lawn to native plants. It was designed to help watersheds. But if you use the right plants, it's going to help biodiversity as well. There's an island off Florida where they're paying homeowners to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. This is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. You have an endangered species on your property. We're going to pay you to take care of it. Everybody would want one. St. Louis, Missouri, Fayetteville, Arkansas had a bounty on calorie pears. You take out the calorie pear, or you might know it as Bradford pear. You get a free tree replacement. Water utilities are giving people $100 coupons to plant water-efficient native plants. And the very successful lawn conversion programs in the far west, particularly California, where they don't have one crop for cool season European grasses. You put in you get $2 per square foot by replacing it with appropriate xeric planters. Okay, I think we made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. The first one is we come to think of nature as an option. We like it, we enjoy it, but we don't really need it. And if it's optional, that means when resources are in short supply, when push comes to shove, nature takes the backseat, and that's always. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out. They have this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We got to save nature, save wildlife, so that future generations can enjoy it. It was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for creating the national park system. We got to save these places so that future generations can enjoy them. And I agree, but that suggests that nature's there just for entertainment. It is entertainment, but it is far more important. We need to save nature so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. And we talked about this, but if we restrict our conservation efforts just to the areas where there's not very many humans, we're going to fail. Because those efforts are too smooth, too small, too few, too separated. David Quammen has a great analogy between a Persian rug and a functional ecosystem. That is a Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. I hate that language because it implies that there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, even including much of our agriculture. So we need to put the plants back, folks. We need to glue our rug back together again. Not just to create biological corridors so that plants and animals can move between viable habitat, but to create viable habitat where we've destroyed it. Stan Rushworth, the Cherokee elder, once said that the Western settler mindset is, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You are not born with those mindsets, you are taught them. We're great at teaching the one about rights. We've been terrible at teaching our kids and our peers ourselves about the obligation that we all have. Nobody gets a pass on this. We all have an obligation to good earth stewardship. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. Right now, so many people feel powerless about the earth's problems. The earth's big, the problems are huge. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn, one person can put in keystone plants, one person can turn out the lights, one person can get rid of their invasive species that we didn't talk about very much, but you know that's important. One person can put in a pollinator garden. One person can totally revitalize the little local ecosystem where they live and enhance their bigger local ecosystem rather than degrade it. It also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. You'll get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, that's where you focus. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy. Help a park or preserve. They'll love you. They're all underfunded, understaffed. They'll love you as a volunteer. So as property owners or as volunteers, each one of us has the power. We certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to be determined